I've been self-employed for 26 years. So, prior to the show, I understood the importance of making it happen every day.
They called it one of the greatest reality shows ever made. Millions of Americans cleared their schedules every single week just to watch two guys dig through dusty barns and forgotten sheds in search of hidden treasure. At its peak, American Pickers was pulling in over 5 million viewers per episode. 5 million. That is not just a television show. That is a cultural institution. And then, almost overnight, it was gone. Not canceled, not officially ended, just gone. Quietly moved around the schedule, stripped of its marketing, drained of its energy. And the stars who built it? One is dead. One nearly died in a crash that should have killed him. And the woman who ran the shop? She's been dropping hints that the show may never come back. So what actually happened to American Pickers? Was it a betrayal between lifelong friends? Was it a corporate power grab? Or was there a much darker force pulling the strings behind the scenes, one that nobody saw coming until it was far too late? Stay with me, because this story is wild from start to finish. And trust me, by the end of it, you are going to have some very strong opinions.
I know exactly what you mean.
I bought a motorcycle when I was 15. I still got it.
Do you?
Yep.
Well,
Oh yeah, we both ride quite a
One of the
bit.
bikes in there is it's been with us over 40 years.
The Golden Era. Let's go back to where it all started, because you cannot understand how far something has fallen until you understand exactly how high it once stood. The year was 2010. Reality television was everywhere. Every network was looking for the next big thing, something that felt real, something that felt raw, something that didn't require expensive sets or A-list celebrities. And then Mike Wolf walked through the door with an idea that sounded almost too simple to work. Two guys, a van, and the entire American backroads. That was it. That was the pitch. And somehow, it changed everything. Mike Wolf wasn't some Hollywood producer with a fancy office. He was a genuine picker, a man who had spent most of his adult life driving through small towns, knocking on strangers' doors, and asking if they had anything old they were willing to sell. He wasn't performing a character. He was the character. And that authenticity was something television audiences could feel through the screen. The show gave viewers access to places they had never seen before and would probably never see on their own. Forgotten barns stuffed floor to ceiling with rusted motorcycles, crumbling sheds hiding vintage gas station signs worth thousands of dollars, attics full of mid-century American relics that most people didn't even know existed. Every single episode felt like a treasure hunt, and the audience was right there in the van with Mike and Frank, feeling every bump on the road. And speaking of Frank Fritz, let's talk about him for a second, because Frank was not just a co-host. Frank was the soul of the show. Where Mike was enthusiastic and polished, Frank was gruff, funny, and completely unpredictable. He had this working-class charm that made him feel like your favorite uncle, the one who always had a crazy story and somehow always found the most interesting junk at a garage sale. He balanced Mike perfectly. One man's energy canceled out the other's in the best possible way. Together, they created something that felt genuine, unscripted, and deeply human. And then there was Danielle Colby, who anchored everything from The Office. Danielle was sharp, resourceful, and brought a gritty kind of energy that complemented the guys on the road. She helped plan picks, manage the shop, and gave the show a personality beyond just two dudes in a van. She was the third pillar of a triangle that, when balanced perfectly, held up an entire franchise. The fans did not just love this show, they were obsessed with it. They rewatched episodes. They visited Mike's antique shop, Antique Archaeology, in person. They flooded social media with clips, discussions, and fan theories about which picks were real and which ones had been staged. The American Pickers community was alive and passionate, and that energy translated directly into ratings gold. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever had a favorite show? Not just a show you liked, but a show you genuinely loved? The kind you looked forward to all week? If so, then you already understand exactly what American Pickers meant to its most loyal viewers. This wasn't background noise. This was must-see television, and that makes what happened next so painful. The first crack. Great things rarely collapse all at once. They erode, slowly, quietly, piece by piece, until one day you look at what you once had and barely recognize it. For American Pickers, the erosion began long before most fans noticed. Behind the smiles, behind the handshakes on camera, behind all those dusty barns and road trip laughs, something was quietly rotting at the core of the show's foundation. By season 21, viewers started picking up on something strange. A subtle shift in the show's tone. The easy chemistry between Mike and Frank began to feel forced. The banter that once flowed naturally felt rehearsed. And then one day, fans tuned in and noticed something that set off alarm bells across every fan forum and social media group on the internet. Frank Fritz was gone. No announcement. No goodbye episode. No heartfelt farewell. Just absent. Like someone had simply edited him out of the show's reality. Fans hit social media immediately demanding answers. They refreshed pages, posted threads, sent messages directly to the show's accounts. And what did they get in return? Silence. Complete, deafening silence. Now, when a network goes quiet about a major cast member's disappearance, that silence says more than any statement ever could. And fans knew it. Theories started spreading like wildfire. Some said Frank had been fired. Others claimed there was a massive behind-the-scenes fallout. A few even speculated that Frank's health was in serious decline. And none of those theories were entirely wrong. Eventually, Frank Fritz himself broke the silence. Because if the show and the network weren't going to tell the truth, then Frank was going to tell it himself. What he revealed shook the fan base to its core. Frank claimed that the show had undergone a quiet but dramatic power shift. According to him, American Pickers, which had always been a partnership built on equal chemistry, had become completely tilted in Mike's favor. He wasn't just saying Mike got more screen time. He was saying the entire dynamic of the show had been restructured to serve Mike's image at the expense of their partnership. In Frank's words, it had swung 1,000% in one direction. He felt marginalized, sidelined, and, perhaps most painfully, replaced in spirit long before he was replaced on screen. Think about that for a moment. 40 years of friendship, nearly 2 decades on the road together, and somewhere along the way, one of those friends started feeling like the hired help instead of the co-founder. But here is where the story gets even more complicated, because it wasn't just the power dynamic that drove Frank away. There was something else going on, something more personal, more painful, and ultimately more devastating. Frank underwent major back surgery in 2020, and for anyone who has ever had serious spinal surgery, you already know it is not just physically brutal. It is emotionally and psychologically overwhelming. Recovery is long, painful, and isolating. The kind of experience that strips you down to your most vulnerable state. During that recovery, Frank Fritz waited for a phone call from his best friend of 40 years. That call never came. Not from Mike, not through intermediaries, not even a text message sent through a mutual friend. Nothing. Mike Wolfe, the man Frank had known since childhood, the man he had built this entire television empire with, went completely silent during one of the most difficult periods of Frank's life. Now, let's pause right here. Because I want you to genuinely think about this. If your closest friend, someone you had known for 4 decades, someone you had worked beside for 15 years, if that person went through a major surgery and you never called them once, what would that say about your friendship? What would it say about where that relationship truly stood? Frank's response was to stop keeping the feud private. He took to social media and voiced his pain openly. He sat down for interviews and didn't hold back. He was hurting, and he wanted people to know why. The fans, who had always loved Frank, rallied behind him hard. Many of them explicitly stated they would boycott the show until Frank was treated with the respect he deserved. The divide in the fan base became impossible to ignore. And then Mike Wolf finally responded. He released a statement. A brief, carefully worded statement saying he wished Frank the best and hoped he would recover fully. That was it. And honestly, that response might have done more damage than the original silence. Because to fans who were already heated, that statement felt like a corporate press release. It felt calculated, emotionally flat, like a CEO addressing a public relations crisis rather than a man speaking about his best friend. The internet lit up with anger. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds. Mike's reputation, which had always been that of a warm, relatable everyman, took a serious hit. But here's the part where things get even messier. Because Mike didn't just stay quiet. He eventually came out with his own explanation. And what he said next dropped a bombshell that nobody saw coming. The bombshell. Mike Wolf revealed publicly that the reason he hadn't pushed for Frank's return to the show wasn't just about their personal tension. It was about something far more serious. He claimed that Frank had been battling addiction, specifically opioid dependency and alcoholism, issues that Mike said had developed in the wake of the back surgery and its painful aftermath. According to Mike, he and the network had been genuinely trying to help Frank get clean before bringing him back in front of the cameras. Now here is where public opinion became deeply divided, because on one side, you have people who said Mike's silence was understandable, that he was protecting Frank from the pressure of returning to television before he was ready, and that addiction is an incredibly sensitive situation to navigate publicly. On the other side, you have people who said this explanation felt like deflection, that revealing someone's private health struggles in a public response to criticism was not protection. It was retaliation. And then Frank threw another grenade into the conversation. He publicly accused Mike of plotting to replace him with Mike's own brother, Robbie Wolf. That all the talk about addiction and recovery was nothing more than a convenient cover story to justify a decision that had already been made. That this had never been about Frank's health. That it was always about power, money, and brand control. Do you see how this story keeps pulling in every direction at once? Just when you think you know who the villain is, something new surfaces that makes you question everything all over again. And honestly, that tension, that ambiguity, is exactly why this story captured so much attention. Now, where was Danielle Colby in all of this? Danielle had always been the glue that kept the show's personality intact. She was beloved by fans almost as much as Mike and Frank themselves. So when the feud exploded publicly, everyone wanted to know, whose side is Danielle on? Her answer, though sparse, was clear enough. She appeared to side with Mike. She kept her words minimal and stayed largely out of the drama. But here's the thing. In a situation this heated, staying quiet and choosing Mike's corner looked the same to fans. The perception was that Frank was alone, that the woman who had been his colleague and friend for over a decade had chosen business over loyalty. Some fans called it a betrayal. Others said she was simply being professional. But either way, the damage was done. The American Pickers family, the one that millions of fans had invested years of their lives into watching, had officially fractured. And on screen, you could feel it. After Frank's exit, the show went through visible changes that no amount of production polish could hide. The energy was off. The natural back and forth that made each pick exciting was replaced with something that felt manufactured. Mike was still there, still enthusiastic, still knowledgeable. But without Frank pushing back, cracking jokes, and offering his rough-edged perspective, the whole thing felt like a conversation with only one voice. New cast members were brought in to fill the void, and the fans were not kind about it. Comments exploded with criticism. Viewers said the new additions lacked the chemistry, the authenticity, and the raw personality that Frank had brought effortlessly simply by being himself. You can train someone to pick antiques. You cannot train someone to be Frank Fritz. Production eventually tried a bolder move. reportedly testing a younger replacement team to see if fresh faces could revitalize the franchise. The backlash was instant and brutal. Fans were furious. They didn't want a new version of the show. They wanted their show back. Executives reportedly had to abandon the reboot idea entirely and shelve any future plans of replacing the cast wholesale. And that is when something quiet but devastating started happening behind the scenes. American Pickers stopped being treated as a flagship show. The corporate eclipse. Here is something that most casual fans never think about when they're watching their favorite shows. Behind every episode, there is a network, and that network is not in the business of sentimentality. It is in the business of numbers. As American Pickers limped forward without Frank, the History Channel began quietly shifting its priorities. Long road trips, vintage car rentals, storage fees for antiques, expert appraisals, all of it costs money. Serious money. And as viewership numbers slid, that financial equation started looking worse every quarter. Meanwhile, the network was watching newer formats perform extremely well. Mini documentaries, spin-offs like Pawn Stars Do America, shorter productions that required less travel, smaller crews, and faster turnarounds. These shows were cheaper to make and easier to market to a younger audience. From a purely corporate perspective, they were the smarter investment. American Pickers was being weighed against spreadsheets, and it was losing. The show started getting shuffled around the schedule, the classic move networks make when they're quietly distancing themselves from a property they no longer fully believe in. Fewer reruns, less promotion, smaller presence on the History Channel's official website and social platforms. No big season premiere events. No aggressive ad campaigns. Just a show quietly fading into the background, while the network's attention turned elsewhere. And if the internal politics weren't enough, the money problems extended even further. Advertising dollars across the entire television industry were shifting. Brands wanted to align with content that dominated social media, content that generated clips, trends, and online conversation. American Pickers, whose core audience was older and less digitally active, simply wasn't generating the social buzz that modern advertisers demanded. Sponsorship deals that once flowed easily began to dry up. That meant tighter production budgets at the exact moment that production costs were rising. The show was essentially being squeezed from both ends. Less money coming in, more money needed to maintain quality. It was an unsustainable equation, and everyone behind the scenes knew it. And here is something that reportedly made the financial situation even more complicated. Rumors began surfacing, though never officially confirmed by either side, of a dispute between the History Channel and Mike Wolfe's production company over merchandise profits. Branded t-shirts, books, antique replicas, a growing market that both parties had an interest in monetizing. And if those profits weren't being shared in a way that felt fair to both sides, that tension would have added another invisible fracture to an already crumbling structure. Now, the network never confirmed this. Mike never confirmed it. But the media leaks and industry whispers were consistent enough that people with insider access clearly believed something was wrong behind closed doors. On top of all of this, the show was simply getting old. Let's be honest about that. After more than a decade, even the most loyal viewers had started to feel the fatigue setting in. The picks started feeling predictable. The deals started feeling less exciting. The items didn't deliver the same jaw-dropping wow factor they once had. The formula that had felt so fresh and exciting in 2010 had, by 2023, become something you could almost set your watch to. Fans who had never missed an episode started skipping weeks, then months. Then they found other shows with new personalities and fresh stories and simply never came back. The audience was aging. The younger replacement audience never fully materialized, and the energy that once defined American Pickers had been slowly, steadily leaking out for years. Viewership dropped from over 5 million at its peak to under 1 million. Let that sink in for a second. A show that once commanded the attention of 5 million Americans every single week was now struggling to hold on to less than 1 million. That is not a dip. That is a collapse. But even after everything, the feud, the cast changes, the budget squeezes, the falling ratings, nobody could have predicted what was coming next. Because the universe, apparently, was not done with Mike Wolfe, the crash that changed everything. September 12th, 2025. Columbia, Tennessee. Mike Wolfe and his girlfriend, Letitia Klein, were out for a drive in a 1958 vintage Porsche. And if you know anything about Mike Wolfe, you already know that driving a vintage car through a small American town is about as Mike Wolfe as it gets. This was his world. This was where he was most himself. Columbia, Tennessee, wasn't a random stop either. Mike had spent years and millions of his own dollars investing in that town, revitalizing it, supporting local businesses, pouring his personal passion and financial resources into making it a place worth visiting. Columbia was, in many ways, a physical extension of everything American pickers had always stood for: history, community, the beauty of forgotten things given new life. And then, without warning, an SUV pulled directly into their path. The other driver, reportedly intoxicated, gave Mike no time to react properly. He had only a fraction of a second to make a decision, and in that fraction of a second, he gripped the steering wheel with everything he had. The 1958 Porsche, a car built 6 decades before modern safety engineering, had no airbags, no crumple zones, no automated emergency systems. Nothing between the passengers and raw impact force except the metal of the car itself. The steering wheel broke under Mike's grip. Letitia later said that Mike's instinctive reaction, his attempt to brace and swerve simultaneously, was the only reason he wasn't impaled by the steering column in the aftermath of the crash. Read that again. He could have been impaled by his own steering wheel. Letitia absorbed the worst of the impact. She was airlifted to Vanderbilt Medical Center in critical condition. Mike followed behind in an ambulance, drifting in and out of consciousness on the way there. The man who had spent 15 years driving back roads across America in search of forgotten treasure nearly lost his life on a Tennessee road in a car he had probably loved for decades. Mike was released from the hospital within 24 hours. Letitia was not so fortunate. She remained hospitalized for 5 days, and then faced a series of follow-up procedures in the weeks and months that followed. The other driver was reportedly charged with vehicular assault, beginning a legal process that would drag on long after the physical wounds began to heal. In a 2026 interview with People magazine, Mike opened up about the full emotional weight of that night. He spoke about what it felt like to nearly lose his life just months after losing Frank. He spoke about what the crash forced him to confront, about time, about priorities, about what actually mattered when you stripped everything else away. And what he revealed next told you everything you needed to know about where Mike Wolfe's head was in this new chapter of his life. Not long before the crash, in April 2025, Mike had quietly made a decision that shocked the antique world. He permanently closed his antique archaeology store in Nashville, Tennessee, a location that had been open for nearly 15 years and had become one of the most visited antique destinations in the entire country. The store that fans had driven hundreds of miles to visit. The store that had become a real-world monument to everything the show represented. Gone. Mike said he needed a new rhythm. He wanted to be closer to his hometown of LeClaire, Iowa. He wanted to spend more time with his 81-year-old mother and his young daughter. He was, whether he said it in those exact words or not, stepping back from the version of himself that American pickers had created and stepping towards something quieter, something more personal, something that the crash had made feel more urgent than ever. When the Nashville store closed, fans immediately jumped to conclusions. Financial ruin, a behind-the-scenes fallout, a sign that the entire franchise was collapsing. And while some of those fears were exaggerated, the closure was undeniably significant. It wasn't just a business decision. It was a signal that the Mike Wolf of 2025 was a fundamentally different person than the Mike Wolf who had launched American Pickers 15 years earlier. And that change, that personal evolution, raised the question that fans were now asking loudest of all. Where is the show now? So let's get to the question that brought you here in the first place. Is American Pickers actually done? Here is what we know. The show is currently in an extended hiatus. Production has not been running on a normal schedule. Danielle Colby, who has always been connected closely enough to the show's inner workings to have real information, has made public statements that have fueled speculation the show may be finished for good. She has been deliberately vague, but the vagueness itself feels like a message. At the same time, both the History Channel and Mike Wolf have publicly stated that the show has not been officially canceled. The History Channel aired memorial title cards for Frank Fritz during the season 26 premiere. They ran multiple marathons of Frank's best episodes in October 2024, celebrating his decade-long legacy. Mike has spoken in interviews about dedicating the entire new season to Frank's memory, visibly emotional when describing his fallen friend as a dreamer whose contribution to the show's success can never be overstated. Danielle and Robbie Wolf both released heartfelt public tributes praising Frank's humor, his warmth, and the irreplaceable energy he brought to every room he walked into. But here's the thing. All of that is beautiful, and all of it matters. But none of it is a renewal announcement. None of it is a confirmed season. And in the television industry, not officially canceled and actively in production are two very different things. The show that once ran on the fuel of genuine friendship, real chemistry, and an unscripted road trip spirit is now navigating a world where its co-founder is dead, its creator nearly died in a car crash, its Nashville landmark is permanently closed, and its ratings are a fraction of what they once were. So here is the real question. Not whether American Pickers is officially canceled, but whether the version of American Pickers that made people fall in love with it in the first place can ever actually return. Because here is what the numbers and the drama and the corporate decisions can never fully explain. The thing that made American Pickers special was never the antiques. It was never the deals or the finds or the restored motorcycles. It was the relationship between two men who genuinely loved each other and genuinely loved what they were doing. It was Frank's laugh and Mike's enthusiasm and the way they talked to the people they picked from, with respect, with curiosity, with the kind of warmth that you simply cannot manufacture. That chemistry is gone now. And it didn't just leave when Frank Fritz disappeared from the screen. It left slowly, painfully, through years of unresolved tension and public hurt, and the quiet breakdown of a 40-year friendship. The reunion in May 2023 mattered. Mike being by Frank's side when he passed in September 2024 mattered. The love between them was real. That was never in question. But television is unforgiving, and the audience that made American Pickers into a cultural phenomenon has moved on. The verdict. So now it's your turn. Because after everything you've just heard, the power struggle, the silence during surgery, the addiction allegations, the accusations of betrayal, the corporate decisions, the near-fatal crash, and the death of a man who was the soul of the show, I want to know what you think. Was Mike Wolf the villain in this story? Or was he someone who made human mistakes in a complicated situation that had no clean answers? Was Danielle Colby's silence a betrayal of Frank? Or was she simply a professional trying to stay out of someone else's war? And Frank, was he a victim of the industry's brutal power dynamics? Or did his own choices contribute to his fall? Here is what I will say. The story of American Pickers is not the story of a bad person ruining a good show. It is the story of what happens when success puts enormous pressure on real human relationships, and those relationships begin to crack under the weight of money, ego, health struggles, and the relentless demands of a television machine that never stops running. Mike and Frank loved each other like brothers. That much was proven not by anything said on camera, but by the fact that they found each other again at the end. By the fact that Mike was there when Frank took his last breath. By the fact that Mike stood before cameras with tears in his eyes and told the world that Frank Fritz was a dreamer who changed his life. That is not the behavior of a villain. But it is also not the behavior of someone who handled everything perfectly. And the fans, millions of them, deserved better than the silence and the public feuding and the slow, undignified erosion of something they genuinely loved. American Pickers may not be officially dead, but the version of it that mattered most to the people who watched it is gone. And no network decision, no new cast member, and no marketing campaign is going to change that. The question now is whether Mike Wolfe, after everything he's been through, after the grief and the near-death experience and the quiet transformation happening in his personal life, still has something to say to the world through this show. Whether the road still calls to him. Whether there is a version of American Pickers that can honor Frank's memory while building something new. That answer, we don't have yet. And maybe that uncertainty is the most honest thing about this story. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Do you think American Pickers is coming back? Do you think it should? And who do you think history will remember as the real reason it all fell apart? If this story hit different for you, if you're someone who actually remembers watching